6 seconds. That is how long it took. 6 seconds in Dallas, and an American president was dead. 54 months later, in a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles, another Kennedy fell to the ground with bullets in his body. But here is what the government never wanted you to know. The man convicted of killing Robert Kennedy could not have fired the fatal shot. Not physically, not according to the forensic evidence, not according to the autopsy, and according to newly declassified documents released just this year. Robert Kennedy knew who really killed his brother and was about to become president when someone made sure that would never happen. This is what happened. This is what was hidden. And this is why they had to die. On November 22, 1963, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy sat in the back of a Lincoln Continental in Dallas, Texas. His wife, Jackie, sat beside him. Secret Service agents surrounded the motorcade. At 12:30 p.m., the first shot rang out, then a second, then a third. And in those 6 seconds, the President of the United States was murdered. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. Oswald was killed by Jack Ruby while in police custody. And the Warren Commission concluded that a lone gunman had acted alone, without assistance, without conspiracy, except Robert F. Kennedy never believed that story. Not then, not ever. Within hours of his brother's death, Bobby Kennedy called the director of the Central Intelligence Agency and asked a question that revealed he already knew something was wrong. Had your people done this? Those were his words. Not did they know about this, not were they involved peripherally, but had they done this, meaning had elements of the CIA orchestrated the assassination of the president? This question was not asked by a man speculating. This was asked by a man who knew the landscape, who understood what was possible, who understood what forces operated in the shadows of American intelligence. Because Bobby Kennedy, as Attorney General of the United States, had direct knowledge of operations that most Americans have never heard of. He knew that the CIA had partnered with organized crime. He knew that American intelligence had worked with the mafia to plan assassinations. He knew that elements within the government viewed his brother's policies as weakness and betrayal. And he knew something else, something that would not be declassified for 60 years. The CIA had been conducting operations in Mexico City in the months before the Kennedy assassination. Lee Harvey Oswald, supposedly a lone gunman with no connections, had traveled to Mexico City in the fall of 1963. There he visited the Soviet embassy. There he visited the Cuban embassy. And according to newly declassified documents from 2025, the CIA had him under surveillance the entire time. Not just surveillance, active surveillance by an officer specifically tasked with monitoring Soviet intelligence operations. But here is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. The CIA lied about that surveillance. The CIA told the Warren Commission that they had no relevant information about Oswald's activities in Mexico City. They said they had no recordings of his conversations at the Soviet embassy. They said they had destroyed all such recordings as they routinely did after short periods. But that was a lie. Declassified documents from 2025 revealed that the CIA had extensive recordings. The CIA had photographs. The CIA knew exactly who Oswald was meeting and what he was discussing. And the CIA deliberately withheld all of that information from the Warren Commission's investigation. Why? Because some of what Oswald was discussing involved CIA operations. some of what Oswald was discussing involved people within the American intelligence community. Some of what Oswald was doing in Mexico City was connected to CIA-organized Cuban exile operations designed to overthrow Castro. Was Oswald a CIA asset? The evidence suggests he may have been. Was Oswald a patsy, a man set up to take the fall for a conspiracy he did not plan? The evidence increasingly suggests that as well. What is certain is that the CIA had information that would have fundamentally altered the Warren Commission's conclusions, and the CIA chose to suppress that information. The CIA chose to let a false narrative become official history, and Robert Kennedy knew this. Bobby Kennedy understood the contours of these operations. Bobby Kennedy understood what the CIA was capable of. Bobby Kennedy understood what motivated men like Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante. Marcello was a mafia boss who Robert Kennedy had personally pursued, personally humiliated, personally destroyed through prosecution. According to FBI wiretaps, Marcello had said that if you want to kill a dog, you do not cut off its tail. You cut off its head, kill the president, and the Attorney General becomes powerless. But there was an even deeper layer to this conspiracy. There was something else driving the Kennedy murders. There was a hidden connection that was so explosive that 60 years of government cover-up still has not fully revealed it. The CIA and the Mafia were not operating independently. They were aligned against a common enemy. They were aligned against the Kennedys because the Kennedys represented an existential threat to both organizations. The CIA had conducted unauthorized assassination attempts against Castro. The CIA had lied to the president about the Bay of Pigs. The CIA had violated presidential authority repeatedly. And Robert Kennedy, as the president's brother and closest confidant, had discovered these violations. The CIA knew that if the Kennedys remained in power, a reckoning was coming. Simultaneously, the Mafia was under unprecedented assault. Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General, had declared war on organized crime. He had prosecuted mob bosses. He had seized their assets. He had deported Carlos Marcello to Guatemala against his will. He had imprisoned Jimmy Hoffa. The Mafia understood that Robert Kennedy represented an existential threat to their operations. So the CIA and the Mafia had aligned, whether formally or informally. And on November 22, 1963, that alignment produced an assassination that changed the course of American history. For 4 years, Robert Kennedy lived with that knowledge. For 4 years, Bobby Kennedy conducted his own private investigation. According to declassified documents, he obtained telephone records showing connections between Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, and organized crime figures. According to declassified documents, he hired private investigators to look into the circumstances of his brother's death. According to declassified documents, he became convinced that his brother had been killed as the result of a conspiracy. But Robert Kennedy could not act. He could not reopen the investigation. He could not reveal what he knew, because if he did, he would destabilize the nation. He would create a constitutional crisis. The American people might lose faith in their government. The government might lose credibility in the eyes of other nations. So Bobby Kennedy waited. He waited and he planned. He waited and he gathered evidence. He waited and he built a network of people who might help him uncover the truth. And then, in 1968, Robert Kennedy made a decision that would seal his fate. He announced his candidacy for president. He announced that he would run for the highest office in the land, and in doing so, he announced that he possessed the power to reopen the investigation into his brother's death with all the resources of the federal government behind him. Robert Kennedy was not just running for office. Robert Kennedy was announcing that he was coming for whoever had killed his brother. The Kennedys had to be stopped. That became clear to the men operating in the shadows. The CIA had to protect its secrets. The Mafia had to protect its operations. And both organizations understood that if Robert Kennedy became president, their days were numbered. 3 months after announcing his candidacy, Robert Kennedy won the California primary. He was on his way to the Democratic National Convention. He was on his way to the presidency. He was on his way to power that would allow him to uncover the truth about his brother's assassination and punish those responsible. On the night of June 4th, 1968, Robert Kennedy stood in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles and prepared to speak to the press. He had just won the California primary. The nomination was within reach. The presidency was within reach. The truth was within reach. He never made it to the press conference. Before he could walk to the podium, a 24-year-old Palestinian named Sirhan Sirhan approached Kennedy in the kitchen and fired a gun. Kennedy fell to the ground. Sirhan Sirhan was tackled by Secret Service agents and bystanders. Kennedy was rushed to the hospital. The official story was immediate and simple. Sirhan Sirhan had acted alone. Sirhan Sirhan harbored anti-American sentiments. Sirhan Sirhan was motivated by Kennedy's support for Israel. The case was open and shut. Justice would be served. Except the forensic evidence tells a completely different story. And the forensic evidence is impossible to ignore. Dr. Thomas Noguchi was the chief medical examiner for Los Angeles County. He was the man who performed Robert Kennedy's autopsy. His autopsy was attended by 3 pathologists from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. It was considered a perfect autopsy, meticulous in every detail. And according to Dr. Noguchi's findings, something impossible had happened. The fatal shot that killed Robert Kennedy entered the body from behind his right ear. The distance from the barrel of the gun to Kennedy's head was 1 to 3 centimeters. Maximum 3 centimeters. That means the gun was placed nearly flush against Kennedy's skull. That means the shooter was standing directly behind Kennedy at point-blank range. But here is the problem. Dozens of witnesses were present. Dozens of witnesses saw what happened, and every single witness agrees on one thing. When Sirhan Sirhan began firing his weapon, he was standing in front of Kennedy, not behind him. Sirhan Sirhan was approximately 1.5 to 2 meters away from Kennedy, not 1 to 3 centimeters away. Sirhan Sirhan was firing from the front, not from behind. This is not a matter of interpretation. This is not a matter of perspective. This is a matter of physics. A bullet cannot enter the body from behind if the shooter is standing in front. A bullet cannot be fired from point-blank range if the shooter is 2 meters away. Dr. Noguchi understood this. Dr. Noguchi understood that the forensic evidence was inconsistent with the narrative of a lone shooter. Dr. Noguchi understood that the fatal wound had been inflicted by someone standing directly behind Kennedy at point-blank range. And Dr. Noguchi made a statement that has been largely ignored by the American media for 56 years. I have never said that Sirhan Sirhan killed Robert Kennedy. Those were Dr. Noguchi's exact words. The man who performed the autopsy, the man who examined the body, the man who possessed the most detailed knowledge of Kennedy's wounds, explicitly stated that he could not conclude that Sirhan Sirhan was responsible for the fatal shot. But the autopsy evidence gets worse. It becomes even more inexplicable when you examine the ballistic evidence. Sirhan Sirhan's gun was a Ivor Johnson .22 revolver. That revolver contained exactly 8 bullets. 8 bullets! That is a fact that cannot be disputed. The gun held 8 rounds, and 8 rounds were fired. But something impossible happened in that kitchen on June 4th, 1968. Something that suggests a second shooter was present and firing simultaneously or in rapid succession with Sirhan Sirhan. Robert Kennedy was shot. The bullet entered from behind, passed through his brain, and caused fatal injury. But Robert Kennedy was not the only person shot that night. Ira Goldstein was shot in the buttocks. Paul Schrade was shot in the forehead. Erwin Stroll was shot in the leg, apparently by ricochet. William Weissel was shot in the abdomen. Elizabeth Evans was shot in the head, apparently by ricochet. That is a minimum of 6 direct impact wounds from gunshot. But investigators found more. Investigators found bullet holes in the door frames of the kitchen. Investigators found bullet holes in the ceiling panels. Investigators found evidence that additional bullets had been fired beyond the 8 that Sirhan's gun contained. An FBI agent named William Bailey found 2 bullets lodged in the doorframe hours after the shooting. The LAPD photographed bullet holes in the wooden doorframes. Police officers wrote detailed reports documenting multiple impacts in the kitchen that could not have been fired by a single 8-round gun. Then something remarkable happened. The LAPD destroyed those doorframes. The LAPD destroyed the ceiling panels. The LAPD destroyed the physical evidence that proved more than 8 bullets had been fired. They claimed there was insufficient storage space. But the timing was suspicious. The destruction occurred before the defense could examine the evidence. The destruction occurred before independent ballistic experts could analyze the evidence. A ballistic panel convened in 1975 concluded that 3 of the bullets that struck Kennedy could not be matched to Sirhan's revolver. A ballistic panel, convened by order of a Los Angeles judge, examined the evidence and concluded that Kennedy's wounds were not consistent with bullets fired from Sirhan's weapon. But the most damning evidence came from an audio recording. Stanislaw Prusinski was a Polish freelance journalist covering Kennedy's campaign. He was recording Kennedy's victory speech with a portable cassette recorder. When Kennedy walked toward the kitchen, Prusinski's microphone was still running. Prusinski's tape captured the gunshots. 56 years later, a forensic audio expert named Philip Van Praag analyzed that tape. His conclusion was shocking. Van Praag identified at least 13 gunshots on the tape. 13 shots. But Sirhan's gun held only 8 rounds. Van Praag identified acoustic evidence of 2 different firearms being discharged. The acoustic signatures were different. The firing rates were different. Multiple independent audio forensics experts corroborated Van Praag's analysis. One man's gun, 8 rounds, but at least 13 shots captured on the audio recording. The mathematics of this are impossible. The physics are impossible. The ballistics are impossible. unless there was a second shooter, unless someone else was firing a weapon in that kitchen, unless the official narrative of a lone gunman was like so many other official narratives in American history, fundamentally false. And that second shooter, according to the forensic evidence, according to the autopsy findings, according to the ballistic analysis, was standing directly behind Robert Kennedy, directly behind him, close enough to touch him, close enough to fire at point-blank range into the back of his skull. Who had access to that position? Who was standing behind Robert Kennedy at the moment he was shot? That answer is remarkable because it is documented. It is documented in photographs. It is documented in witness testimony. It is documented in police reports that were filed immediately after the shooting, before cover stories could be constructed. His name was Thane Eugene Cesar. He was a security guard employed by the Ace Guard Service. He had been hired 1 week before the assassination. The Kennedy assassination was his second assignment for that company. And according to multiple witnesses and according to his own statements to police, Thane Eugene Cesar was positioned directly behind Kennedy, holding Kennedy's arm at the moment the shots were fired. Thane Eugene Cesar admitted to the LAPD that he possessed a .22 caliber Harrington and Richardson revolver. Thane Eugene Cesar admitted to a police sergeant that he drew his weapon during the shooting. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Cesar pull a gun. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Cesar fire his weapon. But the LAPD never tested Cesar's gun. The LAPD never performed powder residue tests on Cesar's hands. The LAPD never obtained ballistic evidence from Cesar's weapon to compare against the bullets that struck Kennedy. Instead, Cesar claimed he had sold his gun before the assassination. When asked for proof of sale, Cesar produced a receipt dated September 6, 1968. 1968, months after Kennedy's death. Cesar had lied about when he sold the weapon. Cesar's own documentation proved that he possessed that gun at the time of the assassination. Who was Thane Eugene Cesar? His background is remarkable. He worked during the day as a maintenance plumber at Lockheed Aircraft in Burbank, California. Lockheed Aircraft was a defense contractor that manufactured military aircraft. Lockheed Aircraft was the company building U-2 spy planes for the CIA. Lockheed Aircraft required security clearance from the Department of Defense to work there. Thane Eugene Cesar had that clearance. Cesar had expressed extremist political views. He had stated that Robert Kennedy would sell the country to communists and minorities. He had supported George Wallace, the segregationist candidate for president. Cesar harbored anti-Kennedy sentiment. Cesar had the means. Cesar had the opportunity. Cesar was positioned directly behind Kennedy at the moment he was shot. And according to Robert Kennedy Jr., Bobby Kennedy's own son, evidence suggests that Thane Eugene Cesar assassinated Robert Kennedy. But the investigation of Cesar was buried. The evidence was ignored. The second shooter theory was relegated to the category of conspiracy theory and fringe speculation. And Robert Kennedy's death was attributed to a lone gunman firing from the front, despite all evidence to the contrary. Why? Why was this investigation suppressed? Why was Cesar never properly investigated? Why was crucial evidence destroyed before it could be examined? The answer brings us back to the larger conspiracy. The answer brings us back to the forces that needed Robert Kennedy dead. Because if Thane Eugene Cesar did not shoot Robert Kennedy, then someone ordered him to do it. Someone gave him the motivation. Someone gave him the authorization. Someone gave him the protection that allowed him to escape investigation. Cesar was not a sophisticated assassin. Cesar was not an international spy. Cesar was a security guard with extremist political views working for a company with deep ties to military and intelligence operations. Cesar was a tool, but a tool wielded by whom? The answer lies in the intersection of organizations that benefited from Kennedy's death. The CIA benefited. Robert Kennedy's presidency would have meant an investigation into CIA operations, into CIA lies about the Bay of Pigs, into CIA assassination attempts against Castro, into CIA partnerships with organized crime. The CIA had everything to lose and everything to gain from Kennedy's death. The Mafia benefited. Robert Kennedy's presidency would have meant continued assault on organized crime. The Mafia's operations would have been disrupted. Mafia bosses would have faced prosecution. The Mafia had everything to lose and everything to gain from Kennedy's death. But there is more. There is evidence that suggests a third party benefited from Kennedy's death. There is evidence suggesting that elements of the federal government, elements of law enforcement, elements of the military-industrial complex understood that Robert Kennedy represented a threat that had to be eliminated. According to declassified documents, according to newly released files from 2025, Robert Kennedy had announced that if he became president, he would reopen the investigation into his brother's assassination. According to declassified documents, Bobby had confided in trusted aides that he believed his brother had been killed by a conspiracy involving the CIA and organized crime. According to declassified documents, Bobby had accumulated evidence over 5 years. Bobby had developed a network of allies. Bobby was preparing to reveal the truth. Then Robert Kennedy was killed. Then the investigation was buried. Then the truth was suppressed. And the American people were told that a lone gunman had acted alone. They were told that Sirhan Sirhan had shot Robert Kennedy. They were told that there was no conspiracy. They were told that there was no second gunman. They were told that Thane Eugene Cesar was merely a security guard in the wrong place at the wrong time. The American people were lied to, and the lie has been maintained for 56 years. The lie has been maintained because revealing the truth would require confronting the reality that American intelligence services conspired to assassinate an American senator. The lie has been maintained because revealing the truth would require admitting that the government has covered up the crime for more than 5 decades. But the evidence is there. The evidence is in the autopsy findings. The evidence is in the ballistic analysis. The evidence is in the audio recordings. The evidence is in the destroyed door frames and ceiling panels. The evidence is in Thane Eugene Cesar's lies about when he sold his gun. The evidence is in the witnesses who saw 2 shooters. The evidence is in the forensic experts who concluded that more than 8 bullets were fired. The evidence tells a story that the American government has spent 60 years trying to suppress. The evidence tells a story of conspiracy, assassination, and cover-up. The evidence tells a story of what happens when intelligence agencies decide that they are above the law, when they decide that murder is an acceptable tool of policy, when they decide that the truth matters less than protecting their operations. 2 brothers two assassinations, 5 years apart, both at moments when they represented maximum threat to those operating in the shadows, both with evidence of conspiracy that was suppressed, both with official investigations that were predetermined to reach predetermined conclusions, and all of it connected by a single fact. Robert Kennedy knew the truth about his brother's death. Robert Kennedy was about to become president. Robert Kennedy was about to unleash the power of the federal government to reveal everything. Robert Kennedy was about to punish everyone involved. Robert Kennedy could not be allowed to succeed, and so Robert Kennedy was silenced. This is American Dossier. This is the investigation that the government did not want you to see. This is the evidence that was destroyed. This is the truth that was buried. And this is just the beginning of what remains hidden in those sealed files. Files that may never be opened. Files that may never be revealed. Files containing the names of people still alive. Files containing operations still ongoing. Files containing secrets that the American government will never voluntarily disclose. The truth about the Kennedy assassinations remains locked away. The truth about who ordered Robert Kennedy's murder remains unknown. The truth about Thane Eugene Cesar, about his connections, about who he was working for, remains classified. But the forensic evidence does not lie. The autopsy findings do not change. The physics remain constant. A bullet cannot enter from behind if the shooter is in front, and a gun holding 8 bullets cannot fire 13 shots. Someone else was in that kitchen. Someone else pulled a trigger. Someone else changed the course of American history. And someone decided that the truth would remain hidden forever. This is what happens when governments decide that they are above accountability. This is what happens when intelligence agencies become untethered from democratic control. This is what happens when powerful forces decide that murder is an acceptable solution to political problems. 2 brothers are dead. The truth is buried. And America continues on, never knowing what really happened, never understanding how close it came to a reckoning, never confronting the reality that its own government may have orchestrated the assassination of a senator and a president to protect its secrets. The investigation continues. The questions remain unanswered. The files remain sealed. And somewhere in those sealed files, somewhere in those redacted pages, lies the evidence that would explain everything. The evidence that would prove the conspiracy. The evidence that would reveal the truth. But that evidence will likely remain hidden, because the people who possess it are the same people who benefited from the murders. The people who possess it are the same people who ordered the cover-up. The people who possess it are the same people who destroyed evidence, intimidated witnesses, and rewritten history to protect their own operations. This is American Dossier. This is the case that remains unsolved. This is the truth that remains suppressed. And this is why, 60 years later, the Kennedy assassinations remain the greatest unsolved mystery in American history. The evidence is there, the questions are unanswered, the truth is buried, and somewhere in the darkness, the people who know what really happened continue to keep their secrets protected by classification stamps and security clearances, and the absolute power that comes from controlling the flow of information in a democracy. This is how conspiracies survive, not through perfection, but through the simple suppression of evidence, through the destruction of witnesses, through the control of official narratives, through the silencing of anyone who asks too many questions. And this is why the American people will likely never know the complete truth about what really happened on November 22, 1963, and on June 5, 1968. Because the truth is classified, and the people with the classification authority have everything to lose by revealing it.